Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video 173, some of the moral implications actually of death's inevitability, because of course human beings are not immortal, unless you believe, again, in some of the weird, more out there physical theories, in which case you can't actually die, because like if you do die, you just jump to a reality where you're still alive. I've spoken prior about how that means you're going to end up like a mummified, zombified freak of nature. Like eventually you'll just be dying over and over again in different timelines, but you'll never actually truly be aware of your death. So you'll just get older and older and older until you can't even move. Now, it's actually a fate worse than hell. Hopefully that's not actually true. It means immortality. It's just a shitty version of it, unless technology then is capable of resuscitating you. Some alien cult will probably dream that shit up at some point. They'll adopt the same basic mentality and it'll be really, really funny. But I wanted to talk about other stuff, like religion. How it hijacks this sense of mortality. Religion, in the absence of death and fear of death, would be basically powerless. Wouldn't really have a purpose because nobody would have to worry. They'd have to worry about temporal things. Religion, on the other hand, talks about the eternal generally. Or at least many religions do. The more successful are simply, if you look at a laundry list of religions that have been large and dominant over time, it's basically their evolution towards being more and more draconian towards non-believers in the eternal sense. Scaring people more, being more effective at being a boogeyman, having a better Satan or a better devil or something. Now, they prey upon that sense of mankind. It's a paranoia or a fear. I've spoken previously about the Buddhist concept of Ashubha, which is a sort of an awareness of mortality, the practice in the literal sense. Ruminating or meditating on a dead body. For instance, you would literally have a decomposing corpse and you'd have like monks looking at it while they're meditating. They're just very, very mindfully watching the entire process of it being totally ripped apart and skeletonized, like birds picking at it, and then insects feasting on the remnant that's rotted away and gets moldy, caked in grime, shelf fungus growing on their bones, and then just sort of fall away into nothing but dirt. By ruminating on that, you see your own future, because it will happen. It might be cremated, you might be embalmed or mummified or something, but ultimately your body degrades. Ultimately, there's nothing left of it but a pile of ashes, basically. Even your bones, over time, will eventually degrade under most conditions. Like any graves. Think of it this way. Here's a really funny thing to think about. If you're in one of the temperate climates of the world, 10, 20,000 years from now, your bones will be ground back up into nothing but topsoil, really by glaciation. The glaciers will advance again. They will plow your grave up. Your body will end up literally homogenized with its rocky and woody surroundings. There will be no gravestone. There will be no remnant. No one will ever remember that you were there. Probably humankind might not even survive. A dim knowledge of some people from the past may survive, but their remnants won't. Nothing that reminds people of them will still exist in the right conditions. And even in the longer term, even in the most stable, dry, plateau climate of central Latin America, or maybe the deserts of the high Sahara, even there, eventually, some earthquake will swallow you up, some tornado will rip you apart, and there will be nothing left. I use this and it actually gives me hope. Now, I believe in reincarnation. Uncontrollable, eternal, not tied into karma, sort of a semi-randomized process for the most part that has some overlap with physics. That's what I believe in. But even if I believe that there was nothing after death, it would still give me hope. Because the alternative is worse. The alternative, again, is eventually a painful inflicted death, number one, potentially, if you're talking about just biological immortality. Or number two, if you're talking about you're literally immortal, you can never die, even with the greatest of technology, something's going to degrade or fuck you up in some way eventually. Or just forget who you are. Your brain runs out of processing power, or you become a freak. They end up just hatching you into a computer. They have to keep adding more flash drives to it so you can keep remembering things. You'll be an abomination, and something could go wrong. The power cuts out. All of a sudden, you lose 1,000 years of history. You're like, where the fuck am I? Shit, how did I get here? Last I knew, I was just, some regular dude. Oh, it's like 2,800? Well, shit, how time flies. I don't even remember it. Be a little bit of a problem. But think about it this way. The spiritual world concerns itself with the concept of mortality because even early on, you'd think of a tribe of primitive individuals, not even necessarily Homo sapiens, operating in a tribal fashion. It's a family or multiple sort of family lineages that have built a tribe together, probably 50, 100 individuals tops. Really, at the time, you couldn't sustain many more, even if they were wandering around to hunt and gather. You think, once in a while, one of their members just keels over or gets injured, ripped apart. They begin worshiping sort of this concept of death, or the concept of the absence thereof. They're afraid of it. They don't quite understand it. Probably, sometimes they're high when they behold it. Then they see even weirder stuff. I personally believe that psychotropics gave rise to human spirituality by and large, that it was a combination of drug usage and a misattribution of cause and effect. I've spoken about Urg punching the tree and then he gets the mammoth, and so he replicates the behavior. At some point, because you've got a large number of different cavemen potentially doing this, one of them dimly understands the basic of cause and effect. They're just getting it wrong. They're assuming it's present where it's really not. It's a coincidence. They form ritualized behaviors. Over time, it becomes religion. We've seen it in the semi-modern period. We've seen it with Siberian shamanism. Originally, people there, they ate amanita mushrooms. They eventually realized it was better to let the reindeer eat them and then drink reindeer piss, because that would remove some of the problems from the... someone at some point was, I guess, into drinking reindeer urine, or their own urine, or somebody else's urine. Maybe they did it when they were high, and then they got high again, and it was a smoother high. And then hopefully they were just, really thirsty at the time. Didn't have time to melt the snow. They're like, ah, fuck it, what else am I gonna do? They wanted a warm drink instead of wasting their time gathering driftwood to go boil water, I suppose. Then over time, after that ritualized behavior begins, they realize how to process it on its own. It becomes further ritualized. It becomes sort of like what would you call it within the Catholic Church? Sort of like communion or something. And then the priests take over. The priest class develops, and then they start, pissing in people's mouths, basically. They are the only ones now allowed to gather and process the material, because they're men of God, so it sort of evolves over time. Part of this could be said to be an avoidance of death. Once you've had these psychedelic experiences, psychonauts talk about this. They talk about losing the fear of death, killing off the ego, realizing there's an eternity. They go off into weird stuff. They talk about all the DNA is a spiritual statement, man. The grass is talking to me. I just talked to a tree. You can understand, I think, how this could pair with the lack of understanding of what mortality really pertains to in maybe early mankind or earlier hominids. Really, since they were encountering these substances, eventually they probably developed the use of these to combat the concept of mortality. Once they were intelligent enough to realize that they would eventually not exist anymore, they got the sense that, oh, well, they're still there, they're just, I can't see them. They've transformed the concept that something could actually go away in a permanent sense. I think they lacked a full understanding of. But religion hijacks the mechanism of the fear of mortality. Even though it is an evolutionary thing, it's actually a good thing. Being afraid of dying helps keep you alive. If you didn't have any fear of death, ultimately, here's an interesting difference between biological and cultural evolution. Biological evolution says, your job is to replicate, have children, survive, continue to grow, stave off death and mortality, mate, obtain food, do that thing, survive, essentially. That's what biological methods tell you, biological evolution. If you didn't have that fear of death, it'd be pretty bad. As an individual, you would probably be more likely to die out. Over time, those people get weeded out of the bloodline. Cultural evolution works almost in reverse at this point in human history. That is, people that do not have a fear of death now actually have an advantage, like they live in safe societies generally. Or they may live in a society that's being conquested. Well, then they're willing to blow themselves up, I suppose. They're willing to kill. They're willing to fight for their beliefs, including their belief systems, on a cultural or even linguistic level. They're willing to fight for what they believe in, because they don't care if you kill them. And so they're better in battle, generally speaking. There's an effect. Christianity has that effect on countries in which zealot Christendom is common. You get a bunch of people who are highly religious who say, well, if I get my head blown off in tomorrow's battle, it doesn't matter. I'm going to heaven forever. Why do I fucking care? I don't care about the temporal world. You'd think of the Vikings, how skilled they were in battle. They didn't care if you killed them. In fact, they thought it was a good thing if they died in battle. The Christian is more neutral. It's like, well, I go to heaven. Yeah, I'll miss my family, or I'll miss my friends, or yeah, I'm going to miss eating steak or bacon or something, you know, as anyone would. But at the same time, then they get to go to heaven. It's more neutral. Within Islam, it's, you know, the same thing for mainline Islam. For Islamofascism, it's more like a berserker mode. It's considered a good thing if you have destroyed yourself. Now, there are certain other spiritual cultures around the world that have the same view. It's about reckoning with the concept of physical mortality. It goes into the spiritual, though, and the spiritual hijacks it. Insofar as religion overlaps with government, it tends to do so more ably. Now, that is, there's a reason why governments would want to promulgate religions that take fear away from their soldiers, that cause their people to ignore temporal difficulties. Like if you can convince the peasant class that when they die, they'll be rolling in wealth, and they'll have rivers of milk and honey, and you know, every treasure and all the good food, and, you know, limitless sex or whatever, like Mormonism does. You know, you can have astral wives and multiple ones, and then, you know, just have infinite children forever, and then they, I don't know, do whatever. You can be with Xenu or something. If you can convince people of that, they're less likely to rebel, absolutely. Until they develop a breakthrough philosophy that says, oh, yeah, actually, that's not the way that it works, because we interpreted some vague part of our scripture in a different way, which also happens as well. But I find death to be a fascinating concept. I strongly recommend people ruminate on their own mortality before they get to the point where they're on their deathbed. I have a feeling there's no worse fate that you can, having overdosed before, I have a feeling that there's no worse fate that you can suffer than in your dying moments, time slows down to a crawl, and for the very first time you're ruminating on the fact that you are dying. You've never thought about yourself as mortal before in any deep sense. Oh, it must be terrifying. You can feel the coldness approach, and then you feel feeling dissolve away. All you are is locked in your mind. Even when your external senses have ceased, your mind is still dimly, briefly firing off a little bit, for several hours. That must be absolutely chilling to somebody who hasn't ruminated on these things. It must be absolutely terrifying. If reincarnation is real, I wouldn't want the last things in my life to be terrifying. I would want it to be like, oh, yeah, okay, it's time for another adventure. A Gandalf mode or something. I think that would be a better way to bring forth your new life if that happens. And if you're religious, again, even if you're religious, you believe in heaven or whatever, have you actually deeply philosophically comprehended your own mortality in the physical sense? What it means for what happens at that moment of death before you've passed on and gone to meet with Jesus or whatever? Is it going to feel like 1,000 years of cold torment with your brain firing off ever more slowly random chunks of memory from what you've already experienced, or random emotions, just guttural feelings? It could be orgasmic. It could be absolutely wonderful. It could also be 100% pure terror. It would be like hell. And it would feel like a much longer time, because once your awareness begins to ebb away, your perception of time will slow to a crawl. And so it's not going to feel like a couple minutes that your brain is still firing when you're technically already dead. It's going to feel like a couple thousand years maybe. Oh, well, that could be a problem. In a way, I think if someone was vaporized instantly, like by a nuclear blast, it might be the most painless death they can have. Actually, they wouldn't even recognize that their brain couldn't fire off fast enough, and they just cease, like they blink out instantly. Maybe people should look into the ethics of how capital punishment is meted out, or how war is conducted, based on some of these spiritual arrangements. Just a little bit of thought on the basic concept. That's about all. Peace out.